Thanks so much. And thanks to everyone who joined in today. I'm really looking forward to painting this kind of calming winter scene with you. If you have questions, feel free to ask away. I'm sure that, I think Annie kind of will look at the chat, but if there's common questions, she'll ask. But it's however Annie kind of wants to run that part of it. But do ask whatever questions you have, because either I can address it as we go or at the end, or however that works best for the flow of the demo. And we're going to be using Liquitex mediums and paint and medium today, obviously. And so I'm looking forward to sharing some information about that. And what else to say? Oh, I'll just tell you a little bit. I'm an artist in North Texas. It's kind of just a little bit north of Dallas. And we have 3 kiddos that keep us busy. And I've just felt really fortunate to have a job like this where I can kind of come into your homes virtually and talk about art materials and paint with you. And at the end, I always love seeing what artists do, how they interpret the different projects. So hopefully we'll have time at the end, or I bet we'll have time at the end to kind of share what we've done, so we can see how everyone kind of took this opportunity to make their own work. Also hope you have a nice warm cup of coffee or tea or something like that with you, like I have. I'll be drinking it from it frequently, probably. All right.
Could you run through the name of their, well, not maybe the name, but the colors at least of what we'll be using today? Because
sure.
Yeah, because I was too late to get that on the list that was on my email. So
sure. Yeah, I'll definitely pull that one out for a quick reason. So for this particular piece that we're going to paint today, these are the different colors I use: indigo, light bismuth yellow, transparent orange, fluorescent yellow, fluorescent blue, and titanium white. All 5 of these are some of the new Liquitex Heavy Body colors. I added the fluorescent pink because I want to show another piece in a bit that gives kind of a different mood based on how you start the card process. We're going to use a monotype process, which is a way of making a unique print. And we're going to start one of the prints with fluorescent pink and then a different with fluorescent pink mixed with indigo, just to kind of give different moods to a couple of different example paintings. So that's why, so with 6 colors and titanium white, you have a lot of different options that you can use in your own work. But yeah, these are the colors we're going to use today. Does that help?
yes.
All right. Good. So the paper I used is by Winsor Newton, and I'm using a hot pressed watercolor paper. It's 140 pound. I had the 9x12 size, which I find is a nice workable size for a lot of the projects that I do. And I think it works nicely for making this project. This is the professional watercolor paper, and so it's 100% cotton. It's going to be I like to say archival. Sometimes people talk about acid-free, that kind of thing. It's kind of the same idea. Basically, because it's 100% cotton, you're not going to get any type of strange yellowing or degradation of the paper over time. So the neat thing about the professional watercolor pads as well is that, I don't know if you've ever had pads before, and the concept of a pad is that it has glued edges that keep the watercolor paper flat. So when you're working, it doesn't buckle as you add water. Sometimes it can be really difficult to find where to put the palette knife. I love this innovation where they have the corner free. So you can just gently pull up the corner and release the paper from the pad, which is what I'm going to do. Of course, you might have whatever different paper you have handy, but I'm just sharing what I'm using today. So in order to work on this particular scale, all I did was tear it in half, fold it in half. So I'll just do that now. And I just use my fingers to bend it and fold it in half. If you have a bone folder or something like that from card making, you could certainly use that for a little bit cleaner process, but I'm just using my hands here. And I'll do it a couple of times just to make sure I get a nice deckled edge. And then I'm going to just carefully start at the seam. I usually like to do that. I usually like to make a small tear so it doesn't get all wonky on me. And then I just carefully pull away from the other side. And I love doing this with watercolor paper because I like that little deckled edge that you get. It just helps, you know, just warm it up a little bit. Of course, you could use a paper cutter or something like that if you want. And I'm certainly not opposed to, once you do your painting, you may want to cut it down depending on if you want to mount it on a different piece of paper, or if you have a certain envelope size you want to fit it into, you know, if you're mailing this to friends or whatnot, friends and family. So there's certainly fine to do. I'm just sharing how I started this particular piece.
I have
And
one.
yeah,
And
sure.
after that, I won't ask anymore.
No, it's great.
What's the difference between cold press and hot press for paper?
Yeah.
Does it act differently?
Yeah, the main difference to know when you hear the words hot press and cold press, it has to do with texture. So hot press is a very smooth surface, and I don't want to, I have to watch myself. Sometimes I digress into too much detail, but hot press is very smooth paper, and cold press has a slight texture to it. Oftentimes, the most common texture you're going to see at stores is going to be the cold press. So that's a perfectly fine one to use. I just decided to use hot press because I wanted to have a very smooth surface, and I wanted my brush strokes and my monoprint base to be the main textural part of the piece. If you have cold press handy, you can certainly do it. It's just going to have a little more texture when you're done. The third kind of common watercolor texture is rough, which is going to be obviously the roughest of those three. And you can really see a lot of visible texture in the paper. Okay, so that's kind of the quick difference in those two text, types, hot press and cold press. So the project description mentioned that we're going to use a monotype or monoprint technique. And so this is where your palette paper comes in once you have your paper teared and you're ready to go. And we're going to use one of the new Liquitex mediums called Satin medium. This is a really handy medium for to mix with all of your colors as you're working if you want to kind of get a more uniform satin sheen while you're painting. Sometimes artists can get bothered by a glazing medium or something with gloss because it can reflect too much light while you're working, so that can be a little annoying. Satin medium is good just as an all-purpose painting medium. But in this particular technique, I found it useful to lower the texture of the heavy body paint to make some nice smooth print backgrounds. And so that's how we're going to use it today. So what we'll do first, the background on this piece is the fluorescent blue. And so fluorescent blue, this is one of these things when Liquitex released these, I'll just show you this real quick. This is just a little piece I did to kind of show all 12 of our new heavy body colors. I couldn't find my Liquitex one that had all the names, but I found this more quickly. But we have, I think, 6 fluorescents and then 6 other unique color offerings, of which I said I was going to be using 6. So this just gives you an idea of 6 of the new colors that that Above Ground should have on hand for you if you're interested. But we're starting with fluorescent blue. And I'll just squeeze, we're going to use this part. If your palette is like mine where you have a hole in it, use this part for mixing and leave this part of the palette paper blank, okay? So I'm going to just put about, I don't know, that's like a 1/4 teaspoon of color out. And then we'll put, probably like, I don't know, like a 1/4 size, that's US dollar, 1/4 size amount of satin medium, probably more than that. But the good thing about the satin medium, you don't have to, get too concerned if you use less or more than I'm using. Just know that the more satin medium you use, the more transparent your color will become. But for the monoprint, really, I just want to loosen the texture of that thick, heavy body color in order to paint it out so we can pull a print. Okay, so just use your palette knife to gently mix it together. And so you can see that the texture is not super runny, but it's definitely not as thick as heavy body started out without it being mixed into the satin medium. Okay, so I'll clean my knife and set it aside. And then I'm going to take my Liquitex freestyle brush. This is the bright size 6. Of course, you can use different brushes that you might have handy. I did do a lot of the painting with both of my bright brushes, however, so these are the 2 that I'm going to be using. And I'm using this one to lay out this paint for our print. So you don't have to get, I mean, I don't get real exact with it. I am going to use I'm just kind of eyeballing this area here. When I measured this particular piece, it came out to like 7 inches by 4.5. And again, excuse me, I was thinking I could translate it to metric for you, but I'm not that quick. So you'll have to forgive me for using inches. But so I'm just kind of thinking of getting it about that size again. And since my palette paper is 9 by 12, I'm just painting it in with about 1 inch, well, give or take 1 inch border on each side. And you can see I'm not getting too particular with making it really smooth and even. I'm just trying to load up this section of my palette paper with a good amount of the fluorescent blue and satin medium mixture. And so just take the time you need to get that done. And this is where you might, you can play with it and do more texturing if you want. I'm just kind of trying to get paint on the palette paper. And this is how we're starting the painting. And then the rest of the piece is going to be what we paint in. But monoprinting, another way to say it is like a unique print. It's a one print that you pull from a surface. So like once we pull this, you really wouldn't get, I mean, you could pull another print, but it probably wouldn't be as wonderful as the first one you get. So it's another way to think of it as a unique print. It's the one print you're going to get from what you put down. And if you want to, you can play with putting some brush stroking in. From playing around with this, I found that it didn't matter terribly if I had a lot of brush stroking. I just wanted to make sure that the paint was thick enough on the surface. Okay. And you want to make sure that you put the paper down before it starts to dry. So we're going to quickly pick up our paper, and then just eyeball it. I like the deckled edge down. You do what you want to do, of course, but just kind of guesstimate where I want it to be using the palette paper. And that'll happen. It may slide on you, and that's fine. But you just use your hands to just gently rub the paper onto that painted area on the palette paper. Now, this is always a really cool thing. I mean, it doesn't take a lot to excite me, I guess, but I always think it's fun pulling this from the surface. And so just carefully pull your print off of the palette paper. Now, if I would have had a little less paint, I wouldn't have as many striated marks. I tend to like that. You can see that some of the edges didn't pick up the painted part. So that's going to add some different texture and dimension to your background. And so every time you do this, it's going to turn out a little differently. And so that's one of the things where I think, it's a nice way to kind of embrace that magic, maybe too strong a word, but that kind of magic or process of the unique print, because now that's going to be the structure of your painting. So what we can do now, like at home, if I'm trying to save my palette paper, I would take some time to clean this off and reuse it. But in the interest of, not wasting time on the demo for that, I'm going to just get a new piece of palette paper off of my pad. And set this aside. Now, because my print was a little bit juicy, what I want to do is I kind of want to take a second to just let it dry. And so what I can do, because it doesn't have to be completely dry, I have, but I want it to be a little drier than this, because I can tell this area is going to take a little bit longer to dry. I usually will have a hair dryer handy. I'm not going to assume you have that, so I'm not going to pull that out and do it. But if you had a hair dryer handy and you wanted to, you could certainly use that to help dry the surface. Otherwise, we'll just give it a second to get a little bit more dry. And then what we're going to do while that's drying, I'll just talk about this. What we're going to do to start the image, if you felt more comfortable doing a pencil sketch on top of the monoprint, you certainly can. But I think that you'll find that because these shapes are basically triangles, right? They're essentially overlapping triangles that I think you'll find that it's going to be fairly easy to block them in. And so we'll do this, we'll do the kind of this line of where the snow meets the trees first, and then, you know, we'll just put the rest of the trees in. And then as we're painting, well, we'll get to that, but I think that that's, you know, definitely you can put as many or as few trees as you'd like into your painting. I have 7 here. And I kind of wanted the focal point to be this tree and this tree. But of course, because our eye tends to like the center, I think this also becomes a bit of a focal point as well. All right. So the first, in this piece, what I want to sketch in the background of the painting is, and you know what, I'm going to take this second to clean my brush really quickly. I just have a container of water over here that I'm using. Just a little, clean it with a bit of water. And dry it with a paper towel. And I think what I will use is I'm going to use the smaller brush, the number 2 Bright. These are synthetic filament brushes which work really well with acrylics. And they're actually what I'd call a synthetic hog, which I think is kind of funny to think about, but like a fake hog hair. But it looks like a hog bristle brush if you're familiar with those. But unlike traditional hog, which will go limp in water, this synthetic filament will keep its body even when you rinse it in water. So it's a great way to, you know, to have a little bit more control over a thicker paint like the heavy body color. All right. And then we're going to sketch in our tree line with this color called Indigo. This is a really fabulous new color that when you look at it in the mass tone, which is the color right out of the tube. And by the way, on all of our tubes that you see in person at above ground, you will see actual paint painted on the label. So you're seeing the actual color, but you also see something else. You see this black square that tells you that this is a naturally opaque color. And you might see, like on the fluorescent yellow here, you see the half black and white that tells you it's semi-opaque. And I don't have, oh, and then like this color, transparent orange, it's an open square that tells you it's a transparent color. This can be helpful to start looking at when you're choosing colors so you can better predict how it's going to behave either on its own or in a color mix. But all that's to say, I've been enjoying using this Indigo. It is a mix of 3 pigments. You can see we put all of our pigment information on the label, so you can see the 3 different pigments used here. We're also going to give you our light fastness rating. This stands for light fastness 1, which is our most permanent color. The fluorescents have what's called NR, which is non-rated, which all that, don't let that kind of flub you up. All that means is any fluorescent available on the market by any manufacturer, it does not have a permanence rating similar to a pigment system. So fluorescents, while they're quite lovely to use, they're just not going to have exactly the same permanence as a color that has a light fastness 1. But all that to say, for projects like this, where maybe it's cards or gift giving or things like that, where you're not counting on it lasting 100 years plus, you know, they can be a really fun addition to your palette. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'll just squeeze a little bit of the Indigo out onto the palette paper. And then I'll take my Bright number 6. This is still going to be a little bit juicy, and that's okay. The thinner areas are going to be dry enough. So, and it's going to be fine if yours was juicy like mine, it'll drag some of the color into your sketching, but that'll be all right. I think you can tell from this piece, it's not a super realistic, it's a very loose kind of interpretation of the evergreens and snow. So I'm using mine as a reference. Let me see if I can put it out so you can see that as well, if you want to sketch along with me here. There we go. All right, so I'm just, since I'm right-handed, I tend to start things like this on the left side, probably like that whole reading right to left thing. I'm sorry, left, yeah, right, left to right, sorry. Anyways, I'm going to start over on this side, and I'm just going to start to sketch in my first evergreen shape. And I'll give a little bit of a hint of where this darker value base is. And then we'll move over to this. And what I'm looking at when I'm looking at copying a sketch like this or painting like this is I'm kind of looking at where the tips of the triangles land, because I do want this rhythm of where the different points sit in the landscape. So that's what I'm going to kind of focus most on. And then just kind of flesh out my triangle shape there with a rounded bottom. And then this little one here, I'll just sketch in with the edge of my, I'm using the edge of my brush. I'm not using the flat part. I'm using the crispy edge. And then I'll do the same here. Just go upward. And then this one, this of course won't be exact. And that's kind of the beauty of it. And that's why I love seeing what you do at the end, because we're all going to have our own way of placing shapes on a surface and ways of using the brush. And that's why we're, you know, having fun painting rather than doing photographs, trying to get it exactly the same. Sketch that out. And you can see here, I went a little beyond where I wanted to go. That'll be fine. I can, another beauty part of acrylic is I can just paint over this as I need to, if I want to adjust any part of the painting. Okay, I'll take a paper towel. I just want to dab some of that paint off. And I'm going to look and see if I'm happy with how I sketched it in. Yeah, I think I'm pretty happy with that. What I want to do is I want to hint at the base of these trees here and how that, so yeah, so I think that's about good where we want to go. And then since I have my indigo out, I'm going to go ahead and use that color to begin the trees. So I'll go ahead and start by looking at the dark values of the painting. And paint in here. And the way I approached this painting, I didn't, well, I shouldn't say I did. I guess what I was thinking of with the painting is I like the idea of having really kind of energetic marks. You can see, especially in the sky, it wasn't like large sweeping strokes. I used a bunch of more choppy strokes because that's the kind of energy I wanted to convey. In the snow, I used slightly bigger marks, so it's a little bit calmer. And then on the trees, it's kind of more of, I want to say dancing, like kind of just, it feels like that, just kind of placing quick daubs on the tree. And so as I'm blocking it in, I'm kind of doing that as well, even though I'm going to cover it. And some, I know some artists and some of the trees we're going to do larger shapes, but because this front tree and this tree are kind of some of the focal point areas, I want to have them have a little more energy to them. And I'm just, you know, I'm just kind of having fun with where I want to place some of the darker value areas of the tree. And this kind of piece here, when you look at it, you know, I was trying to capture the idea of light coming through the branches and some snow on the fore part of the tree here. And so that's kind of what the idea is. We're just kind of blocking in the deeper inner part of the evergreen. And then we'll end up with some of the lighter value passages on top. Because if you work with watercolor, you know that a lot of times you want to start with your lighter values first. And I've just noticed in oil or acrylic, I tend to start with my darker values first. However, in this case, we really started with a mid-tone, right? I think this one reason using this monoprint technique is a really useful way to work is you block in the background, which can sometimes be intimidating, right? When you're looking at a blank page. But if you can just start with something that's already there and then begin to embellish on top, I think it takes some of the pressure off of us as we're working. You know, some of you might not be daunted by that, but I can kind of get that, you know, that like, oh my goodness, I've got this white surface or whatever color surface. What am I going to do? You know, it can be a little intimidating. But if you start with a free monoprint background, it kind of gives me permission just to go for it and loosen up. So if you've not used that technique before to begin a painting, I hope it's, you know, something that you'll find useful. And at the end, I'll show you how you can use different monoprint backgrounds to very easily take the same colors in your palette and have different moods based on which background you print first. And for this little one in the back, I'm doing more of a shape fill in because I don't want as much visual texture on these three. I want to give the sense that they're farther in the background. So I am locking in the indigo more uniformly. And I'm just doing half of the triangle here. And we'll do a little bit on this because we're going to mix a green that I'm going to do a little bit more of. And you can see here what I want to go back and do. I want to suggest a little bit of this shadow line that the trees give with the indigo. So I'm going to go ahead and take a second to do that. That way it's going to start to connect our little forest of evergreens in this opening in the snow and kind of ground them a bit. All right. And then we'll go to this other kind of more dominant tree in the foreground. A little bit of dark value here. And some more up here. And you can see too, I'm purposely trying to cover over some of my straight edge just to give a little, to break that sketch line a bit. So I'm purposely trying to do that. And then as I round the bottom here, I'm going to just do a quick little suggestion of a tiny trunk. And then I'm going to move to this tree in the background. I don't want as much detail on it, so it's going to be more full on indigo. And then we're going to add some green. Okay, so let's take a second and assess. Hopefully you're feeling good about blocking that in. I'm going to wipe my brush. And I'm going to clean it. And my water here. And now we're going to mix this deep kind of evergreen color. And to do that, we're going to use indigo, a tiny dab of bismuth yellow. This bismuth yellow is an interesting yellow that I've enjoyed working with. It's semi-opaque, but I found that it behaves somewhat like adding white to your painting, but with, of course, a yellow tone. And so that's a nice kind of variation on just using titanium white everywhere in a painting. Because it is, while it's a soft, what you might call a pastel color, it does have a strength to it that really shows through in a color mix that I think you'll see here. It's a dual pigment color and it's light fastness 1. And then we're also going to use fluorescent yellow because what I think is really fun about the fluorescents is that they can really do nice things in color mixes. It is a semi-opaque color and it's light value like the bismuth, but it really helps turn the mixture we're going to get with the indigo and bismuth into more of a forest green. So I'm not putting a ton of color out. I'm putting probably a 1/4 teaspoon or so of each of the yellows out. And I'll move it over a bit so you can see that. Get a little coffee here. And then, then we're going to mix our green. So you can take some of the indigo you have. I don't know how much you've used, but I'm going to take probably, with the indigo, I'm interrupting myself, but with the indigo, I found that it can be very strong in a color mix. So you may want to take a little less than you think you need. I'll probably take about a pea size amount onto my palette knife. And then I'm going to just dig in. I'm not going to use a lot of the bismuth. I use about a pea size amount of the bismuth here. I want to get that going in a mix. And you can see what happens is that yellow and blue make green, right? So you might expect that bismuth and the indigo to turn very greenish, but you can see it. What it does is it kind of softens or weathers that indigo just a bit without turning it super green. Okay. And I like that effect because I want to add a little bit of kind of that weathered, or can't think of a better term than weathered, but that kind of softer look that the bismuth gives to the indigo. Now, when we add the fluorescent yellow, it's going to go more of the evergreen tone. So I'm going to take probably 2 pea-sized amounts of the fluorescent yellow to mix here. And you can see how now we're getting a more vibrant green thanks to that fluorescent yellow. Now, I'm the kind of mixer when I'm doing paintings, you know, for demos, I'm not really good about taking notes on, oh, I'll use this part to this part, and I don't always remember specifics. So, because when I'm working, I just adjust as I go. And I think for most of us in our studios, that's kind of how we do it. I don't think we set out with color formulas that we just, you know, spit out. I think, at least for me, I'll just speak for myself, but I respond to the color mix I make and then I adjust accordingly. So I want it a little bit deeper in tone. Which I know it's kind of maybe hard to see with my lighting, but it's quite a dark evergreen, whatever, or forest green color. So I want to emulate that a bit further. So I'll just take a little bit more of my indigo, probably half of a pea-size amount. Because remember, it's always a bit easier to make a lighter value color darker than to pour a ton of a light value color into a dark value mix and try and make it lighter. So if I have to adjust it, I'd rather adjust it by slowly adding the darker value indigo. So I'm adding another dab just to get a little bit deeper. Okay, I think that's getting there. Now what we can do too, since I have a relatively, you know, small amount, this would probably be fine for this small painting, but I want to show you another way the mediums can be quite useful for you. Since you have the satin medium, what you can do is make a, I guess you can't see it. Let me put it here. I'll put a little dollop of it at the top of my palette. And then what I do in a situation where maybe I just need a little bit more color, I'll just take some of that, my working medium, and add just a few dabs of that to my color mix. And what's nice about that, not only will it adjust the sheen and make it take some of the gloss down, and make it more satin, it's going to increase the volume of my mix ever so slightly. And the amount I used, yes, it's going to make the color more transparent, but I don't think it's going to be so transparent that it's not what I wanted. I'm not glazing in this piece. I'm really dabbing color, and I'm not worried too much. I guess the sky is kind of a glaze on top of the blue, but it's not a traditional glazing technique where you use a lot of medium. But in this case, I'm just using the satin medium just to increase the volume of my color just a bit. Speaking of surface sheens, if you are someone who, like, oh, I like that satin while I'm working, but I want to deepen the color a bit when I'm done painting, that's where your varnish can come in. So you can use a satin medium, and if you don't ultimately want it to be satin, wait till the piece is done and choose like our high gloss varnish if you want it really shiny, or a gloss varnish if you just want it, with a little bit bump of gloss, and that will unify the whole surface sheen look. Okay. So I'm going to pick up my bright size 2 again, and I'm going to start adding some of this forest green. And what you'll notice, most likely, depending on how humid your studio is, just in the amount of time we were mixing and talking, your blue is probably dried. And so that can be a pro or a con, depending on how you like to work. For this piece, I'm perfectly fine with that. I'm not trying to do wet on wet technique. And so just notice that with acrylics, that's kind of a bonus that you can get. Now, if you're an oil painter, that can be frustrating for you if you're used to how slowly oils dry. But I guess the way I think about it is I'm just glad that as artists, we live in a time with so many different options. And depending on our temperament and how we like to work, or the time and space available we have in our studios, we have different paint medium choices, right? So all I'm doing is just dabbing in on top of the indigo. And I'm trying again. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the edge of my brush and maybe try and get a little bit of a suggestion of branches sticking out. I don't want to get too fussy with it, but do a little bit of a suggestion of that. And because I want this second tree to be slightly in the background, I'm going to block in the green in more of a dominant shape here. And then I will just kind of pounce some, excuse me, losing my voice. I'm going to pounce some more of the green on top. Let me get a drink here. Excuse me. Right. And I'm going to move to this little one in the background. I don't know what's going on in my voice. I think, like, you know, our kids were all had what we call the crup. It was just, you know, no fever, just kind of that light cough that you can get. And is it allergies? Is it a cold? What is it? But I think it's unfortunately started to visit me now. So made my voice a little scratchy. All right, so I'll move to this third kind of background tree. And I hope you're really getting into that zone where it's just fun to respond to what you see on the surface and just watch your painting emerge in front of you. You know, I think that's probably why a lot of us keep coming back to painting. Is just it's that experience of interacting with the surface and just relishing what you can do with your hands and your brain and your eyes, and how you can use these tools to make something that you want to look at. Hopefully others want to look at as well. And I know that sometimes artists can feel, I don't know, either you know, like something didn't turn out like they wanted, or get a little stressed out about that. But to me, I guess just from doing this long enough, I just try to really embrace the chance to play and have fun with the process. And not every piece is going to be a masterpiece or be something that maybe you just love to pieces, but I think it's all worth the exploration and the process. So hopefully you do as well. All right, so we blocked in our green. Oops, sorry about that. And now I think I want to stop from the trees and I want to catch up with our snow. And so let's go ahead and get titanium white. This is probably the most popular color that Liquitex makes. And, you know, most paintings out there have a really large percentage of titanium white in them. And, you know, so that is what it is. I don't think it's neither good or bad. It's just a very popular color that it does get used in a lot of pieces. So I'm going to switch to my number 6 bright for blocking in some of the snow. And you can see here that I want to leave some of the blue background to show through. So I'm just going to block in some larger areas with my snow, just kind of imagining. Oh, and you know what? I want to soften the color and make it a little not so dominant white right now. So all I'm going to do in this case, oftentimes I'm using my palette knife to mix, but with these areas, I'm just going to use my brush to mix. So I'm going to take it, I'm going to dip it into my indigo and just get a tiny amount on the tip and just mix that into an area of my white with the brush. Because I'm just trying to soften the starkness of the white, make like a soft blue gray almost. And that's the lovely part of the indigo. It gives you this color variation, which one of my colleagues, Jimmy Leslie, talked about making it look like different layers of washed jeans. Like your most washed, oldest pair of jeans might be this lighter or this faded color of indigo. So I'm going to start over here and I'm just going to brush that stroke downwards. And then I'm going to leave a little gap for the blue. And then you can see this is a fairly big brush, and I'm just kind of turning the brush as needed to work into these smaller areas. And I find that, of course, you can use whatever brush types you want. But I found that using a bright or a flat edge, even for rounding an area, can be kind of an interesting way to add a certain kind of energy to your painting, because you're going to get little blips and little overmarks that I think just add interest to the visual surface of the piece. I'm going to jump over here and do a little bit of I'm going to cover that blip I made earlier, but just do a little bit of the snow there, and I'll have a little bit in the foreground here. And if you want to, you can cover, like if you have kind of like I've just chosen to go to the edge of that color, but you may want to leave a little border of your background. That's certainly your artistic call there. So now that I've blocked in some of the snow, what I will do now is I'm not even going to clean my brush in between. I'm just going to take a scoop of the white and pull it down to a different area of the palette. And I'm going to take the blue that's already on the brush and mix it into that white. So that effectively gives me a little bit lighter value of the snow, but still keeps the tone that was already there. So it just gives me a little extra lightness. And I'm going to layer that on top of some of these blue-gray areas, just to hint that, yes, we do have some light hitting these areas and making it a little bit brighter, making the snow a little bit brighter. Okay. All right, and then we'll pause there for a second. I'm going to wipe my brush and let's work on the sky a little bit. What I try to do with paintings is I don't, hey Linda, just happened to look at the chat. Good to see you. Linda is a colleague of mine in our fine art program, so I'm really glad to see her up there. And hello to those of you who said you were going to join this class. I forgot to say that earlier, so thank you so much for joining in. All right, so now I want to work on the sky. I found it's good to try and grow your painting the entire way, not focus on one part too much, because it's a nice idea to feel like the whole painting comes together at once, right? So now we're going to work on the sky a little bit and block that in. And so what I did for the sky is I took this color called Transparent Orange. It's naturally transparent, and this is a unique pigment that Liquitex has. And you can see that because I forgot what this acronym stands for, quite frankly, but it just means that because it's such a brand new color, even though it's gone through the American Society for Testing Materials or the ASTM testing, it wasn't required to be released yet because Liquitex did all the R&D on the particular pigments used. So it's another way of saying it's proprietary pigment at this point, but it's naturally transparent, light fastness 1, and it can do really nice things on its own or in a mix. You can see that right out of the tube or the mass tone, it's a deep kind of red orange. But in this case, adding a bit of white to it really softens it, yet keeps that intensity as well. So it's like a soft intensity, if that makes sense. And what we'll do is I'm going to go back to my smaller bright brush. Hold that in the, sorry, I'm throwing things around here. Actually, I'm going to pick up my palette knife and we're going to add a bit of white to the transparent orange. So I'm going to take a scoop, about a pea-sized amount of the white. And then I'll dip my palette knife into the transparent orange and just get a very, very tiny little dab on the tip of my knife and mix that into my white. And I can see right away, okay, I need a little bit more. I want it a little bit stronger than that. So again, it's easier to add the darker value color and just do it slowly. So I've got kind of a soft peachy color. I think will look really nice on that blue monoprint background. This is a case where I want to add a little satin medium. So I take about a pea-sized amount of the satin medium just to give me a little more volume. And that is going to add some transparency. And so what I can do later, if I feel like it gets too transparent, I can just mix up some more color. But for now, I'm just kind of blocking in the sky. So I'm taking the this color mixture. I'm going to start at the base of the trees or the edge of the trees and just begin to dab it in. And I'm starting here and going around. And it looks like questions are being asked and answered in the chat, so that's great. And of course, Annie, if you see questions that keep coming up that you'd like me to answer, feel free to have me do so. Because I'm just talking here.
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt. Linda has been a great help in the chat to answer some questions, but I
Good.
did have one question that was asked. Why not use basics paints instead if you're thinning them down with a medium?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. I mean, you certainly could use basics. We wanted to show how these unique colors with heavy body can be used to paint this scene. And what you can do too, and I think what I did here is after I blocked it in, we're going to do some of the layering with the heavy body right out of the tube without mixing it. So you're going to get a little bit more texture. So it's just a way to show how it's certainly a choice you can make, but the colors we're using today are not available in basics. So we wanted to showcase what these unique colors can do for you. And in this particular piece, I didn't have a ton of really heavy impasto texture, but there is texture that the brush gives that is a little more dominant than what basics will do for you. So yeah, I'm not gonna loosen every single color mix, but yeah, that's a good question. I hope that answered it. Let me know if it doesn't, Annie, for whomever was asking that. So I'm just kind of going through and dabbing on the perimeter or the edge of the trees. And now I've got kind of that, I was thinking this is probably like a sunset, but you know, I've got that light, it's getting smokier and darker, and now it's kind of fading in the background. So what I'm going to do is add a little, this is again where I'm going to take my brush and dab it in the transparent orange and just mix that into the color I have here with my brush. Take a little bit more. This is very intuitive. Just respond to the mix that you get on your own. Of course, you can make it more vibrant than what I'm doing. This is just kind of how I'm choosing to interpret this particular painting as we go. And you can see already it's going to look a little different because my mix was a little lighter than I had here. And I'm just going to roll with it because I'm fine with that. But if I wanted a little darker, I would just have added a bit more transparent orange. So this is a case too where this mixture I can come in and continue to dab around the trees and flesh them out a bit, bring a little more form to them. But I'm consciously trying to leave some of that background exposed. Again, I think that gives some visual energy to the painting. And I just really like that play of this peachy, transparent orange tint with the fluorescent blue monoprint background. And I'm going to take the chance to oh, Annie, did you have something for me? Or no, I heard something, but yeah. I'm going to take the chance to start dabbing a bit of this color into the tree as well, since we have it mixed up and ready to go. I'm just kind of partitioning out. This is basically a gradation of 3 different colors in the sky, which you just can, some of it will be wet on wet blending, but it's a visual blend too, just by layering like this darker value transparent orange on top of some of the lighter value. Okay, and now I'm going to just kind of twist my brush into the paint that I have left, and I'll start to dab just a little bit of that particular color into my tree, like a kind of imagining where the light might be shining through and placing that down. Of course, you know, just respond to what you have in front of you and what looks right or good to you. Doesn't have to be a lot, just a few little hints here and there can be nice. And I'm going to do this tree as well because these are my two kind of stars in front, I guess I could say. So dab a little bit of that in. Okay, good. And then now I'm going to wipe my brush off. And I'll rinse it in some water. And this time I'm going to take my palette knife and I'll drag a little bit of that transparent orange to the side. And now I'm going to take that was probably about a pea size amount of transparent orange I have, and then like a half a pea, half a pea size of the white. But there are better ways of describing that my brain is not coming up with right now, but c'est la vie, that's where I am. My brain is. Okay, so add a little bit more white. I want it a slight bit softer. So I want it to integrate with what I already have there, but also add some of that warmth to play against the blue background and the blue in the snow. I'm just kind of visually looking at it now. I want it to blend a little better, so I'm gonna add a bit more white. So that's probably close to a pea-sized amount of white in total with that transparent orange. Just clean off my knife, take my brush, move this over just a little bit so you can see it. And now I'll work at the top here, top going downward. Just dabbing, having fun dabbing the color in. And again, you know, there's white showing, there's texture from the monoprint showing. You can leave as much or as little of that as you like. That is up to your artistic eye, your vision for the piece. If you want to level out the piece, you can certainly do that by kind of playing with how you layer in this transparent orange mixture. If you want to, I'm probably going to leave that less than uniform edge there because I kind of like it. So I'm going to leave it and just continue going across my sky here. Now, what I thought was funny about this is I, have memories of being in snow with Evergreens when we go on vacations or whatnot. But for you, I'm assuming most of you are in Toronto, could be from anywhere, I guess. I saw, I know my friend Marie online is in the UK, so could be from anywhere. But if you're in places that get a lot more snow than I get in good old Texas, I hope you'll forgive me if I'm not getting the snow vibe correct, because I'm just kind of working from trips and things when I've gotten to be in the snow. It's not something I get to live in on a regular basis. But it sure is lovely when it does actually snow around here. And I do love that. I do enjoy that. Okay, so I think I'm happy with the energy in that sky there. Oh, and I wiped my brush, but now what I'm going to do, I'll take that darker value transparent orange, and I want to pounce a little bit of that onto my trees as well. And this is really subjective, just whatever you think accents your tree nicely or beautifully, whatever you respond to. And I'm using, sometimes I do this without thinking to mention it, but I turn my brush in different directions to help out with how I want to place the mark down. So if I want a very, very thin mark, I try to use the very corner of my bright brush. If I want it to, I just twist it. If I want to take advantage of the flat edge, I can certainly do that. But I find that having this crispy edge that a bright brush gives you, you can do a lot of things with it, even though it may seem, you know, a little clumsy if you're used to using a round brush. As I think a lot of us are used to round brushes because as kids, that's kind of the brush that we have when we get started on kits and things. But like I said, I've been enjoying using these flatter edge that you get in the bright or the flat brushes. Okay, I'm taking a moment to evaluate, and I'm looking here at what I want to do next. And I think what we're going to do now is go back to the snow, and then when we use some of the white mixture, we can put that in the trees and help bring that into focus as well. And then if we have time, then we can go in and even push some of the details in the trees as, you know, as we would like to. All right, so go back to the snow, and I'm going to, if you need to put clean white, more white out, feel free to. I'm just going to take some of the white I already have. But you know what? It has some transparent orange in it. Let me not be lazy. Sometimes I get lazy, guys. So we get some of the white there that doesn't have orange in it. And I'll put that down here. There's still a little bit of orange, but that's okay. You know, it'll soften the mix a little bit. Okay, so I've got my white at the bottom, and I don't want it to be super stark, so I still am going to add just the tiniest amount of indigo. I'm talking like the tiniest teeny bit I can get on my knife, and it might seem a little ridiculous to even try it this way, but that's what we're going to do. So it's, you can't even see it. It's the tiniest amount, but I just want to put that into my white to slightly add a little bit of blue. And that was too tiny, so I can add just a tiniest amount more. And let me hold this up. Really all that's doing is, it's in the painting, it'll make more sense. In the mass tone, it's really hard, or in this tone right here, it's not the mass tone, but in this mixture right here, it's not a heck of a lot different from titanium white. But as soon as you put it on the painting, it will integrate better than just having the super stark titanium white where you don't want it. I'm not ready for any accent like that yet. Okay. So I want to hold it here to be sure. I think that's okay. Maybe you want to, sorry, I need a little tiny bit more, just because there's only a few passages that I want to have that more dominant white. All right, so I've softened it just a little bit, or I've deepened it, I should say, just a little bit with the indigo. And mixing that up. And wipe my palette knife, and then get my bright brush, my size 2 again. And as I'm looking at this, I'm just wanting to put some strokes in to help define some of the shadow in the snow. So I'm going to come in with this higher degree of white mixture, but again, not pure white, and just quickly kind of put some marks down to add a little bit of an accent or highlight there. Same here. And same here. You can see I'm turning my brush. I want some of these strokes to go downward. I want some to reflect what I imagine the snowbank to be. You can play around with how you want the flow, the visual flow of the snow to look as you go. And I think I need a little bit more here. All right, now what I'll do is I'm going to add a bit of this mixture into my tree again. Again, it's not a super stark white, just a little bit. It's almost white, right? Almost white. And dab that in. Imagine where some snow might be. And I'll put a little bit of this on this tree in the slight background, just because I do want it to have a little bit of little bit more definition. And we'll put some here. And now I'm noticing too, there's a little more dimension I want to add back here. So we'll go to that color next. And then we'll finish up with more snow. So yeah, just the push and pull and play of different sections of the painting. Okay. Now let's go back to this. If you have any of your green mixture left, great. We're going to go back to that. If you don't, you can just mix it again quickly. It was the indigo, a dab of indigo, a dab of bismuth, and then double dab of the fluorescent yellow if you need to remix it. But what we're going to do now is I'm going to take some of this excess color, scoop it up here, move it down here, add a little bit of white. So put it into a tint, not a tint, but a tint. Tint it. Oh, it's in the glare here, so you can't really see it here. So it's just taking that green mixture we made, adding white to it, and giving you a tint of color that will coordinate or flow with the rest of your painting. I'm going to wipe off the orange that I stuck my thumb into when I picked up the palette and clean up my knife. And then, so these are the areas I'm accenting here. You can see on the painting that there's some areas that have a softer green, not quite white, but a softer green to it. So that's what we're going to do. That back so you can see it. All right, pick up that color. I'll dab a little bit of it on my this tree in the foreground. A little bit on this in the slight background, and I'm changing how the direction, doing some downward, short downward strokes to kind of suggest snow on the boughs of the, right, that's the word, right? Boughs of the branches, or yeah, I think that's right. Don't laugh at me if it's not right. I think that's right. All right, and then I'll give a little bit of a lightness to that tree in the background. And then we'll do a little bit more on this one in the middle background. And just giving it a little definition, but not making it more dominant than my two in the front. Same here, just a little bit of that softer green on this little one. And I'm even going to soften the brush stroke a bit just to push it in the back just a little bit more. So it's almost dry brush, just softening it a bit. And then we'll put a little on this tree in the background. And back to that question about why use heavy body and not basics. Another reason too is that the texture of heavy body, when you dry brush, the color is just a bit, it's just, for lack of a better word, it's just still more brilliant than basics is. Basics is a great color range, but heavy body is a professional, is one of our professional color series. And because of that, you're getting the full pigment load per color per volume. And so even when you're doing areas that are dry brush without a lot of paint, it's going to give a deeper, richer effect than I found basics to be able to do. So that's another thing too. It's a subtle difference, but it's one of those things. The more you work with the, professional versus accessible range colors, you'll start to see some of those differences in performance. Okay. So now as I'm evaluating, I've got the trees fleshed in pretty well where I'd like them to be, but I want to work on a little bit of the grounding, or grounding the snow in here. And what I'll do is I still want my fluorescent monoprint to show, but I want to do a little bit of a glaze of some indigo on top. So I'm going to take this indigo blue, some that I still had on my palette, put it over here to the side, get a little, so kind of like a large pea size amount, dab it in a little bit of the satin medium. Don't need a lot, just want to do a little bit of a thin layer on top. Take one more dab of the satin. And I think too, trying to remember exactly what I did on this. I think I added a little bit of the fluorescent blue back into it. So let's do that. I'm going to take a little more fluorescent blue that we used for the background and squeeze a little out on the palette. And I'll just take a pea-sized amount of the fluorescent blue and mix it into my indigo and satin gel. And so what that does is it tints that indigo slightly, but it's different than adding titanium white, because when if I were to add titanium white to this mixture, I'm going to add opacity. And I want it to be a little more transparent in this particular instance. Okay. Again, my thumb and the orange. Do it again. All right. So I'll take my bright size 2 brush and I'll just kind of work on grounding the trees in the snow. I'm not going to fully cover up my monoprint, but I want to drag some of this color through. As you can see, sorry, I'm getting into that right brain quiet as I'm trying to assess to see what I think of what's going on here. I'm going to do a little bit there, a little bit over here. Where did it go? There we go. And then a bit more over here, just to kind of pop the beauty of the snow there. And I'm being really rough with it. I'm not filling in all the monoprint. I'm just kind of lacing it in where I think it would be effective. Now what I want to do as well, I'll soften this edge. What I'd like to do as well is I'm going to add, this is where I'm going to go back and add a little bit of indigo on my tree. And round it a bit more. And I think we're doing okay on time. So I think we can do a little bit more of this. So I still have indigo that is good to go painting. And I'm just going to dip my brush into the indigo without, it's not a mix, it's just the straight indigo. And I'm going to come back to the base of this tree. I'm going to overlay some of the green that's there. And I'm even going to go back in and re-dab some of the shadow of the tree. Like there's light showing through the tree, but there's also going to be darker parts. I'm just adding a little bit more of that back into the tree. I'm also refining the base of the tree here. Just trying to give it a little more definition, especially in connection with the shadow right there. And then also I want to get rid of that little area. So it's this push and pull of the painting. Is it, you know, refining, getting it blocked in, but then going back and refining as you see fit. Also think of it as like a conversation with the painting. You know, what is it telling you? What does it want? And to do that effectively, like with any conversation, it's good to not be the only one talking, right? It's good to take a step back and pause and see what it's saying to you and respond to that. So it's always a good idea to take some breaks from what you're doing and look at it and evaluate and then continue. So that helped, I think, pop this kind of area a little bit. And now what we can do is I'm going to clean my brush. And we'll go back to working on the snow. Again, this is just the refining part. but just trying to refine it just a little bit more. And I still have some of my white that had the teeniest tiny amount of, excuse me, of the indigo. Excuse me, a little more coffee. And I'm going to scratch that. I don't want that one. I want the one that was slightly darker. So I'm going to take my brush and dab it straight into the indigo, brushing some of it off here. And then I'm going to take some of that soft mixture, scoop it up, and use my brush to mix it into the darker indigo. And I want to give a little bit more of a soft division between the snow and the shadow here. Do it here. Again, just kind of responding to what I see here. If you're working outdoors, you're responding to what you're seeing outdoors. If you have your own photo that you're working from, you're responding from what you see in the photo. And just adjusting as you go. And acrylic is very forgiving in that way because, you know, I had that blip over here that I wasn't happy with. I was able to paint over that quite effectively, and it was not a big deal. Now, as I look at this little patch, it's a little bit stronger than I want. So what I'm going to do is jump back to this color, which was the indigo and satin mix. And there was already white on my brush. This is giving you a real insight to how I work. Because again, I'm just kind of taking what I have on my palette, and on such a small surface, you can get away with these quick little mixes. But I don't like this to be quite as dark as it is. I want it a little softer. So all I'm doing is taking this darker indigo and satin mix, putting it down, and the white on my brush, I'm thinking will be enough to just kind of soften that snow shadow. And then I may come up and add a little hint of that up here and a little back here. And then I don't know if y'all squint your eyes when I know you can't see me squinting my eyes, but I do that quite a bit. And when you squint your eyes, that helps you, and I'm sure many of you have heard this before, but what that does is it helps reduce the painting in front of you to just the values, and the value is the lightness or darkness of the color. So when you squint your eyes, you don't see the color as much, but you see the value and how that's flowing. And so that's what I'm doing a lot of right now. I'm trying to get some of that value, reducing to value to help me out. And like, for example, here, I'm not liking how this shadow is working. So I'm going to clean my brush. And I'm going to come back to this white with a teeny amount of indigo, take some of that on my brush, put it down here, and I'm actually going to get a little bit of indigo that's already on my palette. And I'm going to just kind of correct or adjust that shadow shape. Just make it a little bit thinner. There, that's a little bit better. That's a little softer, and it kind of suggests the hill kind of a little bit more. Okay. Now the final, oh, you know what? Yeah, one of the final things we can do, just looking here, is now if you want to pop some parts of the painting a little bit more, we can add a little bit of white, just pure white. I actually didn't do that in this painting, and I think I'm talking myself out of it again here. But that is something you can do if you wanted to suggest some really eye-catching parts of the painting. You could just use pure white. But I think I like how this softer, slight indigo white is still popping from the surface. I think I'm happy with that. So just obviously talking out loud. This is my inner workings out loud for you to hear. So just like you know, the random musings of me, but hopefully you can glean something useful out of it. All right, so as I'm looking, I'm feeling pretty good about it, about what I wanted to achieve. Maybe this could be a little bit more integrated. Yeah, I think I will do that. So I don't want this to look so dominant. So I'm just going to take a little bit of straight indigo on my clean brush. And I'm just going to softly layer that on top and maybe do some downward strokes just to kind of reduce the dominance of that tree edge right there. See how that kind of softened it? I'm looking on the screen now. Okay. All right. So I think that, you know, I hope you're enjoying where you are in the process. I think for me, that's about where I want to stop with this painting, but I did want to show you some other things you can do with the colors, that if you bought these colors, the colors that you already have, and how you can do lots of things with a more limited palette. So this blue one that we've been working from was the first one I did. And then a second one I did had to do with using a purple background with a deeper sky. So this is a rich, but kind of more deeper sunset look. And obviously that purple tone gives you it's also to me a little bit cooler vibe, as in temperature cool. Even though blue is a cool color, for some reason that violet with the orange even looks a little bit cooler against that really warm sky. So that I found to be a fairly interesting, different vibe for sure. And really all that was changed was the background. And one thing I want to show you that's really fun about two of these unique colors, the fluorescent pink and the indigo. I'll just turn my palette here to show you. These two colors make a really lovely violet. So I'm going to squeeze out a little bit of indigo. Come on there. A little bit of indigo and some fluorescent pink, a little bit more of the fluorescent pink, and get my palette knife. And I'll just pull, I always squeeze out more than I need. It's just a habit. But I'll take about half of that indigo and about half of that fluorescent pink. And look at that really awesome violet. Let's try to pull it up here so you can see it. Isn't that cool? I just love it. And for that last painting, it was a little, I probably had more pink in it. Well, I had a little more pink. But the monoprint I did with, or the background was this violet with the satin medium. And like she said, it's a very different vibe. Well, I just love this violet that you get when you mix those two colors. Okay. So there's that. And then the third one I did, I was really getting playful, and it to me is like kind of the most joyous or exuberant of the three. And I used just the fluorescent pink background as the base. So you can see it seeping out here. But I loved allowing that fluorescent pink to show through the trees. And so it becomes just a very, I don't know, just a different cheery vibe, for lack of a better way of saying it. But using the same mixes that we used for the most part, I mean, the same indigo, all the same colors that we had, just changing the background with that monoprint and maybe deepening the sky. And then, you know, other than that, I didn't really change a lot. It was just the monoprint and back that changed the vibe. So I'll show you all three together just so you can kind of get a sense of the colors that you have can do a lot of different things depending on how you layer them. And you don't even have to change composition. You just get really different tones depending on how much or how little white you use, what your base is, and even how, of course, how you brush stroke. I think I got a lot looser with this one, and so and that fluorescent pink showing through really kind of, to me, it just makes it look more like it's, you know, not luminescent, but it's like lit, right? It has a light in the background. So we discussed a bit earlier using cold press, and you can certainly do that. It would just give a bit more visual texture. The 140 pound is nice because what I was thinking is if you wanted to, you could cut this to either like 6 inches by 8 inches. I think kind of this worked out too, or 5 by 7 or whatever gives you the border you want, and write a little greeting on the back and just stick it in an envelope. Make sure it's dry for at least a week or so. And then a good idea, because you don't want the acrylic to stick to the paper of your envelope. But what I do too, if I'm sending out little acrylic paintings, is I'll take actually some of my palette paper, just my palette paper, and I'll cut it to cover the acrylic. And then you can slide that into an envelope, and that palette paper with the shiny side down, don't use the back, use the shiny side, face down on your dry acrylic painting. You could slide that in an envelope, they can pull it out and it's good to go. Oh, I just got some indigo on it, but yeah. So just know that you can do that. And I can correct these little blips that I made. So again, the beauty of acrylic, not that big of a deal.